Yep, should be on.
And we got about 5 minutes before it's 6:30, so we'll give the last second arrivals a little bit of grace here, because I'm typically one of them. So. Yeah, Sunday morning we had this set up in the front, so we had this big screen right here because the church was fairly full, and we had the camera out here and a bunch of extension cords. So I was, I like to walk while I talk because I got nervous energy, because you intimidate me, and so I had to keep stepping over these cords. But so if I'm wandering around up here and all of a sudden I'm going like this, that's why. It's phantom memories. There's also a ladies' guild meeting tonight, so as people drive in, they might not even be coming to this meeting. They might be going somewhere else. But we'll kick it off right at 6:30 or just a couple minutes after. But come way up front. Way up front. We're projecting up here, so come way up front. If we need some chairs up here, we could do that too. I know. Nobody likes to stand up front either, let me tell you that. Okay. Next time we have one of these, you're on the docket. There you go. All right. Excellent. Right. Bill, you're not following me with the joystick, are you? You're just on the screen. Okay, good, because you'll be constantly exercising. You'll have carpal tunnel. It'll be a distraction, so, okay. Yep. What was that? Technically, there are handouts, but those are for afterward. There is, I'll refer to it a couple of times, but there's actually a lot more detail in there. I guess just by way of background, we've been meeting 2 committees. We kind of split the council in half and then added some ad hoc members, but we've been meeting since at least February, maybe the end of January, just trying to sort out how do you even structure a comparison between stay or go, let alone make that decision. So, so we kind of started just what do we do here? How do we do this? So we met for quite a while before kind of the treads dug in a little bit and we kind of got going. So the first iteration of this presentation had just a ton of numbers and square footages and number of kids and square feet you need per kid, per class, and dollars and all these, and we were just buried everybody in numbers and data, and that's not the intent. So we kind of restructured it all and backed out to about 20,000 feet. So that's what you're getting right now. The handout will have a little bit more of that information in it. And what we're going to do is, and the next steps will be in here, but at some point we'll have some cottage meetings where once the council makes a recommendation, we'll invite everybody in smaller groups where if you really want to dig in to some of where did you come up with this number? Why'd you have this in there and not that? Things like that. That can't be done, that could be done in a forum like this, where there's 12 of us, but in a meeting where there's 100, that doesn't really work out. So we'll do some of that as well. And then certainly, do you guys have pens or paper or anything like that? I just want to make sure you have something to take some notes with. If you have a question, if you just need clarification on something, and I should apologize to Tracy again for cutting her off on Sunday morning, because she just wanted to know what an acronym meant. So if you have a question like that, please ask. If it's, did you consider this option versus that option versus that option? Save that kind of stuff for the open forum, if you would. You can certainly write it down, and the more things you write down and hand to me after, or email or text one of the committee members or something like that, and they're all listed in the handout you'll get at the end. The more you do that, the more we can kind of kick it off with answers to questions at the open forum in 2 weeks, rather than standing waiting for people to talk and say their piece. So we can just kind of answer some questions and then get into more give and take. So, all right. Pastor Rachi's got more paper if anybody needs it. So just stick your hand up if you do. All right, it's a couple minutes after 6:30, so I'm just going to jump into it. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming tonight. It's a much more intimate group than we had Sunday. Again, if you have a simple question or just don't understand something about what I'm talking about, ask for some clarification. But if it's a real in-depth question, that's more appropriate to save. I'm Andy Nygaard. I'm the president of the church council. So like I said, we had kind of split the council apart beginning of the year to form 2 committees. One to look at just the structure of stay and go. How do we make that comparison? And then another one to look at financial feasibility of expansion, relocation, and what can we afford? And we'll cover all of that here tonight a little bit. So, like I said, it shouldn't be an hour, but we'll see how it goes tonight. So here we go. First of all, in the meeting format, I talked about this a little bit already, but we'll talk about those committees' findings. Questions and comments can be written down. There is a handout to take home afterwards that has a little bit more detail. Most of the slides are in there. I'll tell you which ones are not, and they're the same ones that have the small print that I don't want you to look at real closely. A couple of committee members. I'm here. Tracy's in the back, Pastor Rachi. So if you have questions afterwards, we can discuss some of those as well. So you're a special group. You'll get a little bit more question and answer maybe than we got on Sunday morning. But again, if it's big questions, let's save those for the open forum so everybody can benefit. Certainly for clarification type things, you can contact the committee members in the next couple of weeks. And then the open forum is on the 6th. After the late service, rather than trying to squeeze it into Bible hour. We want plenty of time for everybody to say their piece and hear what they want to hear, ask what they want to ask. So that'll be on the 6th at 11:45. All right, this is where things start. This is our vision statement. We exist to glorify God as we gather, grow, and go. So no matter where that is or how we do it, this is what drives it. We don't gather, grow, and go tied to a specific place. And we can't let a specific place or structure drive that mission. So another way to say that is our ministry has to determine our facility. Our facility certainly can't determine our ministry. Does that make sense? Okay. I did not have this at the end of the slideshow. I don't know if Pastor added it in the meantime, so if I forget when we get to the end, I'm going to come all the way back to slide number 2, just to go back to this at the end. A couple of years ago, we did a second 5-year vision. I think it was probably maybe 8 or 9 years ago. It was right before I got here to Redeemer. Excuse me. That we had done a first 5-year vision. A number of those things, a number of those bullet points in the first and in our second one directly tie to how our facility supports our ministry goals, or how we want that to in our near-term plan. So these are just paraphrases. We shortened them up to fit on the slide, but having a warm and inviting worship and gathering space. That's obviously facility related. To offer an excellent Christ-centered education. Our school is part of that vision. So how we use our school as our part of our ministry ties right into that. Implementing a harvest strategy. And a harvest strategy really has to do with the unchurched or other churched school families, and we have a lot of them right now. And how do we bring them into being part of our congregation? That's not obviously facility related, but I'm going to talk about that a little bit more later as we get into the comparison type things. And then form a task force to develop a long-range facility plan, and that's really kind of what we've been doing. We've been looking at, I'm going to say it now, I may say it again later, but we're essentially at a fork on the road. We know we need to take a step forward and then maybe 5 more steps forward. But do we take all those steps to the left or to the right? That's really the question that's ahead of us. So 5-year vision developed from our vision of gather, grow, and go. And then that helps to drive really our vision of what our ministry ought to be and how it's supported by our facility. So let's take a look back in history and talk a little bit about the context of how God has blessed us really along the years. So we'll start with the school. Back in 1956, that's when Redeemer kind of began the split from St. Peter. Opened the classroom in 1962 with 2 classrooms and 44 students. There's a lot more of this that'll be in the handout. We kind of shrunk it down just to fit it on a slide, but we have, if you look back at our history, there is just a rich story of how God has blessed his church right here at Redeemer, not to mention, in the greater area. Fellowship hall used for a long time there. We had just various additions, improvements, 2 classrooms, gym, cafeteria. And then in 2017, we added the preschool in our music room location. And that kind of drives some of those cascading things that you'll see here later, like our multi-purpose spaces in the school. And I'm going to talk about a few of those as we go. Talk about church for a minute. Way back before the school, Reformation Day Redeemer founded as a mission church of St. Peter's. The school followed later. 56, groundbreaking for our current sanctuary. It started down the street. 1988, sanctuary struck by lightning. Was anybody here in 88? You guys were? Okay. Year later or so, the rebuilt sanctuary was dedicated, and then not that long ago, 2010, we added the pitched roof, bathrooms, office, and the expanded gathering area, which has certainly been a blessing to be able to really have some fellowship time out there before and after services. Just in the last 10 years, I didn't know this, our church membership has grown from 560 to about 660. To address our early childhood projections, we first started Moms and Tots. That drove a lot of that non-member growth that's in our school now, which many of those families have eventually become Redeemer members. And then the preschool, of course, K through 8. Now, leaving preschool out of it for a second, K through 8 enrollment dropped initially from 82 to 53, kind of hitting a low point about 4 years ago rather, then grew again to 84 today, and if you include pre-K, which we added since then, we're up to 96. So the school is pretty full. If you have the opportunity to come during the week, you can kind of see how full it is, and I'll talk a little bit more of that in a second. We added a second pastor in 2021, and then an amazing blessing, our offerings have continued to increase over that time, even through COVID and some of the things that happened just in the last 2 years. The way our congregation and our people show their appreciation for the word in our ministry has just been a tremendous blessing by God's grace. All right, looking ahead a little bit from here, what can we see God providing? in the next 5 to 10 years. Now, 5 to 10 is a pretty open span, and I'm going to show you a chart here in a minute where you can see we're talking about school kids, so you get beyond 5 years out, and those kids aren't born yet when they're starting pre-K and kindergarten. So we have to project a little bit, but you'll see the trends. Continued church growth, we're at, let me go back. We're at 660, 700 is right around the corner, and even 800 within 10 years is certainly not out of the question. So those are pretty reasonable numbers for church growth. Continued school growth, and this is where I was talking some projections, but we do have a large cradle roll. You may have noticed the number of baptisms here in the last couple of years. That's really exciting. Moms and Tots continues to bring people into our early childhood programs. We have not really done any advertising. So there's an opportunity to actually share our school, do some advertising and say, hey, Redeemer has something great to offer, come here. We need to make sure we have room for people to come here before we can do that. So that's one of our challenges, but there's certainly opportunity there. And with or without that, it makes 130 to 160 students a very reasonable projection for 5 to 10 years out. And you'll see that, I think, in the next slide. There it is. So here's our trend from the last 4. This is this school year right here, 22, 23, and this is just K through 8, so preschool is not in here. So we're just up over 80, so about 84 students, and that's up a bunch from this under 60 school year coming out of that 50-something low the school year before. So a pretty good jump going in here. These next couple of years are very predictable because these lower grades just continue to climb into the upper grades. And we can anticipate based on history, some kids will come in, some kids will leave. Generally more have been coming in, so that's factored in here. And then once we get out a couple of years, we're beyond what our cradle roll tells us we're gonna have, and these kids aren't born yet. This column on the end is room caps. Right now, our 1st and 2nd grade class is capped at 28 kids. If you happen to walk past, it's packed, even with little people sitting in those desks. That's a lot of kids in one room. If we had just a complete even distribution of students, 28 in each classroom, we would be, I'm looking for the laser, there it is. We'd be just over this 120 mark capacity. The problem is, and as you see, this is 28, each one of these blocks represents 28 kids. As you go back, this is more than 28, this is more than 28, this is more than 28. They don't evenly distribute themselves. We get the kids we get at the ages we get. So we need to have a little bit of flexibility built in as well. So this is where we get those numbers for projection. As you look out, in the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then beyond another 5, 130 is right around the corner. 160 is certainly attainable in those following 5 years. So some of our current facility challenges, I kept threatening to talk about this, now I'm gonna. 1st and 2nd grade room is at max capacity. In another 3 school years, based on our preschool experience, number of small kids in the congregation, we're fairly certain that we will have another classroom at max. So instead of just the 1 that we have to manage, we'll have 2, and we need to have some flexibility to do that. Next year we'll get a little bit of a reprieve because the 2nd graders will move into the 3rd and 4th grade room, so we'll split that class again and they'll have a little bit more breathing room, but then the following year they'll be back together in 3rd and 4th grade. And they're gonna do that every other set of years, and then there's gonna be another cohort, a big one, coming behind them. Because of this, because we had a 1st and 2nd grade room that was full, if we had a family call and say, hey, I want to send my kids to Redeemer this year, if they had a 1st or 2nd grader, once we hit that cap, we had to turn them away. So that happened with at least 2, maybe 3 families. It's not always perfectly clear whether they were certainly going to come here and didn't because of that, or if they had other options, but there were at least 2 of those wanted to come here, but we didn't have the space for their 1st or 2nd grader. So we're already running into having to turn people away, which is not, hopefully, and I should follow up on this, hopefully they ended up at St. Peter or North Fond du Lac or Faith or one of our sister congregations, but we didn't have room for them here. We have, if you've been down in the fellowship hall, we have that pull-out classroom. That's just so Mrs. Bendix, who's the assistant for first and second grade, has some dedicated room to work with either the first graders or the second graders so they can split that large group up. I think it's in the afternoons. It might be in the mornings. I think it's the afternoons. The parents' room in the back, or Pastor Borgwart's office, or the band lesson room, whatever you want to call it, that room in the back wears 3 hats on a weekly basis. So, during church, it's the parents' room. During the school week, it's either pastor's office or the band room. Can't be both. So, it's again one of those spaces where we're trying to do a lot of things. Our fellowship hall, we've got a breakout space in there. It's the fellowship hall. The kids all eat lunch in there every day. It's also our music space. We also have people doing music lessons in there throughout the day. So our faculty is doing a fantastic job using the space we have and making it work. We have to give them some relief at some point. So, and then limited storage and office space. Again, Pastor Borg, if we had another office, we wouldn't have to multi-purpose that room for Pastor Borgwart's office. Because of choice, this is kind of a sidebar, but because of choice, we've added a bookkeeper and we've got a lot more administrative tasks to take care of in any given week. So having workspace for those folks would also be really nice to have. Right now, they meet during the day in the kind of the conference room right outside the church office, but that's also a space where people count the offerings. That's also a space where, all kinds of other during the day type of tasks go on during the week. So again, we're multi-purposing space, and it's just kind of a daily shuffle to figure out who's doing what where. Kevin, you're here during the day sometimes. Is that an accurate description? Who's going where? Okay. All right, so facility needs to address. School growth, 160 students. This is the next 5 to 10 years. That number of students drives something like 8 to 10 classrooms, so we would need to add 2 to 4 more than we have now. Office and other educational spaces for both church and school. Gym space, again, 28 little kids running around it's great for a basketball game or a volleyball game, but as a physical education space, 1 class at a time, it's probably workable. If you have to do multiple classrooms at a time, there's not room in there. And then outdoor space, and you'll see how our restrictions with outdoor space kind of work into it in the next couple of slides. I'll show you that. And then church growth, 700 to 800 members, worship of 350 to 400 weekly. We are just below that right now. And in fact, if the first and second graders sing in church like they did first service on Sunday, it was packed. We had 3 rows of chairs in the back. We had full balcony. We had 30-something kids up here for children's church. It was awesome to have that many people in here. But if you're a visitor walking in, and you either have to sit in the 3rd row of set up chairs in the back or walk all the way to the front, your first time at Redeemer, that's not the welcoming atmosphere we want to have. We have the welcoming people that we want to have, but making them march to the front or sit in the back is not how we want to welcome visitors the first time. So that's part of the reason for paying attention to where our church numbers are as well. Okay. All right. Now I'm about to jump into the stay or go comparison. So I got to take a pause and set the stage here. Like I said, we started back in January or February, looking at, I promised you I was going to walk all over the place, and then I stood by that wall this whole time, so I'm going to move around a little bit now. I talked about how we started putting this all together. How do we even compare a new versus adding on to what we have kind of thing? So here's where we started. Number one, we're talking about 5 to 10 years here, but we took a much longer view than that. We took a multi-generational view. If we're going to make major changes and invest significant amounts of money, we want to make sure that what we put together at least is compatible with a path toward what our current students' grandchildren are going to use. So we're looking way in the future, not just 160 students, not just 800 church members, but where we might be in 2 generations. we can't possibly predict what that would be. So what it came down to was big church, big school. What does that look like? What would we need for something much more significant than what we've got right now? So we kind of dreamed a little bit, kind of put all that down on paper. And essentially when we structured it all, how many classrooms would that be? How big of a sanctuary would that be? What kind of offices, gathering space, storage space, meeting space, temporary meeting space, small group space, those kinds of things. We threw it all in there. Essentially that kind of coalesced to if we were starting from scratch, we'd just build that. And money was no object. We'd just build that. Money is an object, so we scaled that down a little bit, and that eventually became our goal plan, or a goal model, anyway. So if we were just starting from scratch out in a field somewhere, this is what we'd want, long term. We wouldn't build it all at once. We certainly wouldn't need to. You don't need it to something for 60 years from now, right now. But you'd build it to be able to build on. So we kind of started with that, and then brought that back to, if that's what we want, and this is what we have, can we put all that here? And I'm going to get to that in 2 more slides, and that's where I don't want you to look at all the little square footages and what classroom goes where, because that's not what it is. It's not a building plan. It's just look at the big picture. Does this amount of square footage fit right here? So we'll get to that in a second. So we're looking beyond 10 years, 2-generation thing, brought it back to what this 5 to 10 year plan would be. The other part of that is when you look, beyond 5 to 10 years out, which I'm about to show you. When you look beyond that, which I'm not going to show you, but you go beyond that to the next phases of what we would need to do to grow, the investment amounts end up being almost the same. So what you're going to see here is to add a couple of classrooms onto this building is going to be a whole lot cheaper than building a new 8-classroom school somewhere else, initial investment-wise. Beyond that, to build a sanctuary onto a new school, or remodel a sanctuary and build a few more classrooms here, the costs become comparable. So long term, they both cost about the same. We can't afford to do either right now, that far out. So we have to start somewhere. So that's what we're showing you for 5 to 10 years out. But that's a key point, because one looks a whole lot cheaper than the other, because it is. But that's on a 5 to 10 year horizon, okay? Looking beyond that to what we'd ultimately want to do, they come into parity. So that we don't have a slide that says that, because we're looking at the next 5 to 10 years. But that's what the long-term plan is. So let's start with stay. So the general plan, I will show you in the next slide. Time frame is to break ground. We would probably be a year away from doing that. And like I said, we have a little bit of a reprieve year this coming one, because that 1st and 2nd grade class is going to split. So the school year beyond that, which is about 18 months from now, is when we would want to have an extra classroom or 2 available. So that would be the time frame for this one, and that's achievable. The cost would be $2 to $3 million. And that number, in fact, if it's probably a little closer to $3 million, but that would also involve some internal remodeling of classrooms here to make them a little bit bigger and usable. We have classrooms of 25 plus kids coming through, and some of those classrooms are 700 something square feet, 720. A standard classroom is about 1,000, so they're 25% undersized already. So that does involve expanding some of what we've got as well. And that would be targeting an enrollment of about 160. There's some pros and cons up here. 2 to 3 million is certainly smaller than the next price you're going to see. It keeps us right here where we are. Some of these we can argue all day about whether they're actually a pro or a con. This is the committee's opinion. So if you disagree, that's okay. We disagreed amongst ourselves a little bit on a lot of these. And that's something we can discuss in the open forum or in some of our cottage meetings coming up. Less ministry disruption, and there's 2 ways to look at ministry disruption. Construction is obviously going to disrupt the way we do things around here, no matter what we do. It's going to be a disruption. What we're talking about here is actually splitting. If we take and I'll talk about it more in the go option, we wouldn't build a church and a school somewhere else right away. unless somebody left us their lottery winnings. We just can't do that right out of the gate. So we'd have to build a school sufficient to get us by for a while, and then later on build a church, and then later on expand the school. Where here, we can add some classrooms and expand the school, and then remodel the church, and then add some more classrooms. We don't have to split up onto 2 campuses for some period of time. The cons, and I'm going to show you this in a second, eventually we're going to run out of space. And that's what these two bullets are about, both internally and externally. And that might feel cramped. So a lot of these cons are a little bit related, but they're separate issues. And then ultimately, this is a great facility. It has served us well for many, many years. It is well maintained, but there's always an issue when you're adding new onto old. There's sewer pipes under the building. We're going to put tie new ones into them. There's no way around that. Right now, we don't have problems with any of that stuff. We don't know how long that'll last. And if you can disagree with me after, if you want to disagree with me after. All right, so here's where I'm gonna, these next 2 slides are not in the handout because I don't want you to get lost in the numbers that are on there. Just look at the big blocks of color, and hopefully it's far enough away from everybody that's what you see anyway. So don't, and one more caveat, both with this and this whole presentation, this is information at this point. Don't construe any of this to be a decision or a recommendation. It's none of that yet. Certainly these next 2 slides, and I'm just going to bring it up so you know what I'm talking about. This is not a construction plan. This is just an illustration. Okay, I want to thank Jake Trapp for putting this together. He's an engineer. So when we asked him to just kind of illustrate where all these square footages would go on our existing campus, he did too good of a job and put a lot of detail in here. So don't look at where the rooms are and what all the square footages are. Just look at here is Forest Avenue up here. Here's our exit driveway. Here's our entrance driveway, our sanctuary. So this would have to expand some. We'd have to, move something into the parking lot. This is just the amount of square footage we would have to add. And what we've got available, excluding the parsonage, is 3.5 acres. You're going to see this on the next slide when I kind of go to the south here and show you our outdoor space. And then very, very often, and we looked at this, and this would have to be part of the plan, is purchasing some adjacent properties over time. Don't have to do that all tomorrow, but over time, over that generational time span, we would have to do that. That's expensive. So that has to be factored into the decision as well. Here's the southern part of it. Here's our existing playground. Here's the existing garage up here. These hash marks are how much parking space or how much parking lot we'd have to add just to make up for the square footage that's kind of encroaching on it now. So this is not expanded for a bigger sanctuary. It's not expanded for a bigger school. That's just how much is displaced. So we'd have to move into our outdoor space significantly. We'd probably have to move in a little bit more because we'd have more parking spot requirements. I think it's 5 to 1. So for every 5 seats we have available in our sanctuary, we need to have a parking spot outside. That's the rule. Plus a different factor for handicap spots. The blue is the retention pond. Once we go over about 20,000 feet, and it varies depending on what the architecture is, but when you displace places where, like grass, where rainwater can permeate, if you either pave that or put a roof over it, then you have to account for somewhere for the stormwater to go so we don't overwhelm the city's storm sewers. So we're not going to be very far into this before we will be required to add a retention pond, and that's going to take up a significant part of our green space. So that has to be factored into it. And then this just notes that no parking lot was added, so to speak. So here's what's left of what we might call our soccer field out there, but we use it for a lot of things. We have our outdoor church services out here, so we'd have to relocate or add a different kind of storage building outside, relocate the playground, et cetera. So on our existing 3.5 acres, everything's going to be very crowded if we do everything here. And that doesn't mean it's the wrong answer. It just means we need to take into consideration those compromises that we need to make down the road. If we add properties over time, and I think there's a total of 17 of them, because they're really close together over here, the next block over. And we wouldn't necessarily have to add all those at once, but if you have one holdout out here, that kind of throws a monkey wrench into our plan. So we just have to take those things into consideration as we look to the future of how God might bless us staying. All right, the goal. I don't have a layout here because the layout can be anything we want it to be. We would probably look to buy 13 acres or so, or plus, that'd be the minimum, somewhere, potentially west of town. Faith is already east of town. Good Shepherd is already south of town. St. Peter's southwest, North Fond du Lac's to the north of us, so that kind of seems like the logical direction to go. We did look at some parcels that are out there just to see if anything was available and affordable, so that those current prices of some of those existing parcels are actually factored into this number. So about $7.5 million to build a school facility for an enrollment of 160. So I think that's 8 classrooms on some property, no church. That does include a really nice gym that's about twice as big as ours. So would we have to do that right away? No, but that's the number. Time frame, we wouldn't do that for a number of years. So we would still have to do something here to accommodate a couple of years of those bubble classes before we had the opportunity to buy some property, put plans together, actually break ground, and do the construction to get to this. So that's probably over 2 years out. 2 years is probably attainable if we really hit the gas. Some pros, and these are, you'll see some just inversions of the pros and cons, and I'm going to put them together right here, so don't think too hard about that. Possible future growth beyond the stay option, obviously with more space and more openness, we can kind of do what we want and plan to do that from the get-go. And that's what this is about, planning to meet educational needs in the future, even if we don't do it all right away. That would mean like making sure that when we design a building, the roof lines are such that you can just continue to build on, and the corridors are set up such that you could just continue to build on your existing property. And that makes additions easier when you don't have to match up corridors and window lines and roof lines and things like that, roof elevations. This is what I was talking about, harvest strategy way at the beginning. I personally know of at least one family that toured Redeemer, really liked it here, wound up going to St. Peter because they liked the facility better. That's just one that I know of. Maybe it's the only one. I don't know, but it would be logical that as an outreach tool, people like the new and shiny. Whether that's appropriate or not, we could talk about, but I know that was at least the case with one family. Ample outdoor space and parking. Wouldn't necessarily need to encroach on it. There'd be plenty of room to put a pond with that sort of land footprint. Cons, obviously higher cost, longer time frame, and we'd have to do it in a likely, like I said, if all of a sudden somebody's got a $12 million gift to give us, we could do both of these all at once. Not foreseeing that, we'd probably have to build a school first and then a church later, which would mean we'd have to split our campus for some period of time. Other churches have done that. It's not impossible, but it's really nice to have the kids in the church right here together. So we'd want to bring them back together at some point. We just have to do it differently for a time. So this is not anything new. This is just those pros and the cons kind of stay and go side by side. I'll let you look at that for just a second. And then we're going to talk about money. Let me just make sure I didn't skip something here. Okay. Short term first. What about our school space needs for next year? Like I said, we've got a little bit of a reprieve because that first and second grade class that's full is going to split for a year, but then they're going to come right back together. But how we address that both next year or the year after that really has to do with, like I talked before, we're at kind of a fork in the road. We know we need to take a step for this class. We know we need to take 5 more steps for an enrollment of 160. Do we do that to the left or do we do that to the right? So that's really why we're talking about this now. So short answer, what are we going to do for the immediate need? We'll figure it out as soon as we know if we're going right or left. That's a little bit of a cop-out, but that's the situation we're in. And I think we can get to that relatively quickly. We'll know in a couple months here kind of if we should do something very temporary or if we should do something very permanent. And that's really what the question is for the short-term needs. Is it something that we do in accordance with a further build-on plan here, or is it something that we do temporarily that doesn't cost a lot so we can invest that money in going? And that's the question for this problem. So the financial picture. General takeaway, the financial committee, the Stay or Go committee was working out square footages and kids and classroom sizes and how big of a sanctuary. Well, we were working on that. The financial committee was looking at, based on the congregation, our size, how we expect to grow, how our offerings have looked, what could we afford potentially. And their takeaway is about $5 million. And here's what they kind of included in that calculation. Our past offerings, that we will do a capital campaign, we would have to do that. That does include some amount of loans, and in looking at those loans, they did include not just our offering support, but the WPCP, and that's the choice program, the Wisconsin Parental Choice Program. Projected school growth, enrollment growth, so that we'll see those more kids coming. They did factor in that as those classrooms split, potentially, we're going to need more staff. That's going to be salaries. That's money we can't spend on mortgage payments, so that factors into that number. They looked at a variety of loan options, and then they did consider, I don't know how much this weighs in, not a lot at this point because it's something fairly new, is community or grant support. There are institutions and people out there that are just, hey, you're a church or you're a school, maybe they're not a member here, but they'd be willing to make a contribution of some kind. And we don't often do that. That's kind of a new area to look at. But Kevin Elke was the chair of that financial committee. He has a little bit of experience with that. That's what he does at WLA. So that's a potential. So they factored some of that in here, but it doesn't weigh heavily. So here's some things that could impact that number, plus or minus. Number one, the level of giving to a capital campaign. If that goes wildly successfully, we could be well ahead of ourselves. That would reduce a loan amount or allow us to take a larger loan, those kinds of things. At the same time, if there's not a great response to a capital campaign, that limits us a little bit, because at the end of the day, we still got to pay the bills. And if that includes a mortgage payment, we have to make sure that's not going to bankrupt us in the short term. I'm saying that figuratively. We're going to be careful enough not to bankrupt ourselves, but that's the calculation. Changes to the WPCP program that could be pro or con. Right now, and in going into the WPCP program, we did so knowing that we might have to leave it someday. There's two ways that can happen. Either the state just stops doing it, which is very, very unlikely politically right now, or something happens that we have to make a decision to leave, which is probably, in my opinion, the more likely scenario. The Department of Public Instruction might say, no, you have to teach this about genders, or you have to teach this about same-sex marriage, or you have to teach this about evolution, or something like that. And we just can't abide by those things, so we'd have to leave the program because we wouldn't be able to, in good conscience, do it. Or compromise. So those are cons. That's always on the table. And right now we have what we call a exit fund to just, if we would have to do that, that'll cover some of our expenses for a year while we kind of reconfigure how we operate without that program. Because it's a lot of money. We've benefited greatly from that. There are also a lot of added requirements and expenses, so that offsets a little bit, and we just have to figure out how to move forward. So we're building for ourselves a buffer to make sure that we've got time to adjust. On the pro side, right now you have to qualify. You have to be below a certain income level to qualify for those vouchers. So I think about 40 of our school kids are, in families that qualify. There's an election in a couple of weeks. One of the candidates wants to remove that income and just make the vouchers available or that income threshold, just make the vouchers available for everybody. So, in an election year or in a, whatever administration is in, may make some changes that actually impact us very positively from an income stream from that PCP. Again, we need to be very careful not to become dependent on that, but that could benefit a program. Higher or lower than expected school growth, that could be positive or negative. Higher or lower than congregational growth, estate or other planned gifts. We've had this happen in the past where somebody passes away and in their will leave a substantial amount of money to the church or to the school or to both. That didn't factor in at all, but if that happened, that would certainly positively influence the amount we could afford to use. And then if we do choose a go option, at some point in time, we could sell this property. We didn't figure that in at all. So those are the things. And just a couple of myths. We had lower and higher expected growth and congregational growth. Giving, I guess growth doesn't necessarily mean increased offerings. Giving is not about numbers in church pews. It's about the spiritual maturity of your congregation. When it comes to stewardship, that's a matter of faith, not a matter of presence. So this just means that we need to keep people in the Word and growing in the Spirit, and then naturally those gifts will come. But that's not something we count on just on church growth. And same thing with school. Currently, just because we have more students doesn't mean they're necessarily going to qualify for parental choice dollars. That's a if. So that's the financial picture. So what's next? Let me back up one more. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So we talked about kind of where we've been, what blessings the Lord has given us that caused some challenges with space. And I guess I want to be very, very clear about that. We're not in panic mode. We don't have all of these problems. We have such an embarrassment of blessings that we got to figure out where to put everything. That's a reason to rejoice. So I just want to say that. We looked at some of the stay options, or not some of the stay options, but the stay structure, the go structure, what our financial possibilities are. And now we just got to talk about it. What other information do we need? What other things do we want to see? So to start that part of the journey, we're going to have an open forum in 2 weeks, November 6th at 11:45. Both of those committees, and then ultimately the council will take all that feedback. And before we get into cottage meetings and even down to a vote, we have to make a recommendation. So the appropriate way to do it is the council will take all this, make a recommendation, and then bring that to the congregation. Do we want to stay? Do we want to go? Or something in between? What's our plan? Once we have that, then we can really put a little bit more detail in it to have conversations about how does this impact us. Right now, we're still at 20,000 feet. So we need to take another step down before we go left or right. Does that make sense? Time frame, I don't know. I'd like to do this before the end of the first quarter next year, because ultimately we need to do something before another school year out. We need to have a little bit more space by the time this would be 2023, 24, that 24-25 school year is really where we need to have something in space, so in place. So the fall of 2024, and the more we have time to talk about it. We have plenty of time, but the longer we linger, the less time we have to build something before that deadline. And that deadline could change. More kids could come, and it becomes more urgent. A couple kids could leave, it becomes less urgent. But that's the timeline as we know it right now. That's the last slide, so I'm just going to go, like I threatened, I'm going to go all the way back to number 2. Because it begins and ends with what we're here to do, which is to glorify God as we gather, grow, and go. And that doesn't mean go, stay or go. That means go tell others about Jesus and the peace and the salvation that we have. So whether we do that from here, whether we do that from somewhere else, our task and purpose is the same. We get together to worship our Savior, we grow in our knowledge and understanding of the Word, and then we share that with everybody we can. So, any clarification questions you want me to cover real quickly? Otherwise, I'm going to stop the presentation part, and we can visit a little bit, and I'm going to drink some more water because I'm parched, and we'll go about our evenings. Ombudsman, anything I missed? Oh, and Pastor Rachi has the handouts. All right, thank you very much for coming. Thanks for your time. I appreciate it. I'm going to leave that up there while we stop. Thank you. Thank you very much. Bill, give me the high sign when you're done so I can speak freely.